Hi friends, hello and welcome to another video by Fermuve and Jerry. I'm joined once again by Jerry. Great to talk about um, challenging the Xinjiang United Nations Human Rights Report that came out about 13 days ago, 12, 13 days ago. Well, to be exact, 10 days ago, right? And today we have a very special guest, somebody that has made a very interesting has posed a few interesting questions. So we're going to go through those questions with our guests. But before we do that, Jerry, why don't you welcome our audiences today?
Well, welcome to Fernando's latest show. And we've got for me, this is a really great event because I've never met Grey Fox. And I think a lot of people, for me, even when I saw him, I'm thinking, this guy thinks like me. He writes like me. I think a lot of people think he is me. He's not. He's not. And we're going to see that for a fact. I had the same thing with Jerry Good. A lot of people think that I'm Jerry Good, and I'm not. So I went online with Jerry and had the two Jerrys together. So Grey Fox and Jerry Gray, because my family name actually is Gray, spelled the same way as Grey Fox too. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here today. I've done my own article and video related to this topic. One thing I would like to say is, and you didn't, thank goodness, you didn't refer to it as Michelle Bachelet's report, because it's quite clearly not Michelle Bachelet's report. So that's really all I wanted to say about it to start with.
Right. So, friends, we are going to be talking to Grey Fox, a Twitter account that both of us follow. So let's bring him into the show. Grey Fox, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Hi, Fernando.
Well,
Hi, Jerry.
it's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Very
why don't
happy to
you tell us a little bit about you and whatever you want to disclose to our audience?
Sure. So I was born in Shanghai and I immigrated to Australia with my family, and I now have been living in Hong Kong for 10 years and counting. So happy Mid-Autumn to everyone out there. And I'll clarify that I am Han Chinese male. So according to the mainstream media, I want to dominate the world and all the source of all evil. So watch out.
or overcome the Communist Party of China, one or the other.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
All right. Noting that today is Mid-Autumn Festival is also the day after the Queen of England passed. So also kind of like a message out there of condolences to the people of England. I know that Jerry, you also said that this was close to you. So special mention about today's video on that particular date. All right, Grey Fox, I want to ask both of you, gentlemen, a question. How do you feel when people call you or me or either of us a genocide denialist? How does that make you feel, Jerry?
In order to be a genocide denialist, there needs to be a genocide that you're consciously aware of and able to actually say, I don't believe it, even though there's evidence to suggest that it's there. Having traveled through Xinjiang several times, I'm quite certain there's some problems there. I know that, but there's definitely no evidence anywhere of a genocide. People are welcoming there. People are friendly there. And any psychologist would tell you if a group of people are being oppressed in any way, they wouldn't welcome people like me, a complete stranger and a foreigner, and my wife, who is Han Chinese, together and help us in any way. They would just lock their doors and say, we're not having anything to do with this. And we've been to restaurants. We've actually been into private homes. We've had people helping us. We've sat down and eaten watermelon and honey melon and dates and all kinds of different things that people just give you because they are nice people. So in my case, when people call me a genocide denier, I say, well, where's your evidence there's a genocide? There isn't it?
Yeah, completely agree with that. It doesn't really bother me because it's a fantasy in their minds. It's happening. Yeah. So, okay, yeah, I'm denying your fantasy. So that's great.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Let's jump right into what we want to do today, which is to talk about your threat, your tweet posts that were I understand that you went on a show with Danny earlier. So
Spirit of
this
hope.
tweet has actually taken a lot of people by ask a lot of questions that are important for people to know. Today I'm like blah, blah, blah. My tongue is not right, so you will excuse myself. So let us dive into the first question that you asked. You're asking about the suspicious elements in the report, and that it's important to call into question its legitimacy. The first question that you ask is, okay, who wrote the report? And as Jerry mentioned earlier, there aren't too many signs that this was Michelle Bachelet's report. So, Grey Fox, why don't you tell us what is your line of thinking when you posted this?
Yeah, so I think this point wouldn't be so important if the quality of the report was good. If it was a good report, then maybe the author doesn't matter so much. But since it's such a poor report, then this question becomes important. So if you look at the tweet by the United Nations that tweeted out the report, it was at 12:20 a.m. Geneva time on 1st of September. And that is equal to 6:20 p.m. US Eastern time in New York. So, these things are typically simultaneously released, right? So the report and the tweet typically simultaneously released. However, potentially the tweet goes out after the report. It's possible. But there's some, in my mind, there's some doubt as to when this report was actually published. It could be published on the 1st of September at 12:20 a.m. in Geneva. So that means Bachelet is no longer the High Commissioner for the Human Rights. There are newspaper reports that it was released slightly before midnight on Geneva. It's possible, but they don't actually provide proof of that. There's only that timestamp in the tweet from the UN. So we have to basically trust those newspaper reports that they were being accurate, which I'm not particularly ready to do right now without any proof. However, okay, let's say it was possible. It was still, say, minutes to midnight, right? Do we really expect a quasi-government employee to work to midnight on their last day? I don't know. I think it's a bit suspicious. So,
all right.
So,
sorry. On the question of who wrote the report, Jerry, what answer do you give to that question, and why do you have that answer?
I'd like to add a little bit to Grey Fox's scenario there, and I can imagine Michelle Bachelet fighting off this release and saying this release is not going out. This is not going to happen during my tenure. And I'm guessing that she got to 11:30 and started clearing her desk. And she said, I'm not leaving this room until I know that this is not my report. This is not the report that's going out. This is a scenario that I live with in my head. And about 11:45, she said, well, it's too late now because all of these reports go out with press conferences. It's too late to call a press conference, get people together, make the announcements. She packed up her bag and then she left. And someone said, great, the bitch is gone. Let's press the button and release this report. That's how I see this happening. I'm quite certain, given what I've read in the report, given what I saw in her, she made a speech to an oral report, not a speech, but an oral report to the United Nations. I think it was the 11th of June. She made a press conference at the end of May when she was leaving China, before she left China. Now, I understand that while she was in China, she probably didn't want to disturb or upset the hosts, and that's fair enough. But a few days later, 2 to 3 weeks later, she reported to the United Nations what she had found in China and what steps were in place in China, and they completely contradict this report. So if someone says to me, Michelle Bachelet did write this report, I'd say, prove it, because all the evidence, if I may use their words, the credible evidence is that she did not write this report. Somebody else wrote this report. Who wrote it? I don't know, but I've never seen a United Nations human rights report, and I've looked at a few of them. I've never seen them referencing tweets. And this is something that is happening. I've never seen them referencing already debunked information. And there was some information from an Adrian Zenz report from couple of years ago, where he got the numbers of the IUDs wrong. That's actually been debunked.
I think we're
And they
getting a little bit ahead of
Sorry.
the show, because that's something that Greg Fraxer
Yeah.
points out in his thread. So,
Oops.
who wrote
Okay.
the report is the first question, and that's how I started my video on that particular report, or how I
Who
concluded it.
knows
Sorry,
the answer? Yeah.
her
Who
name
knows?
is not there. It's
Yeah.
customary to
She
have
didn't
her
sign it. Her
name
name's
there
not mentioned in it.
in the preface or somewhere. Her name is
Her,
not there. So that's the first thing.
her visit wasn't just her visit. There were a team of 5 people here 2 weeks before her. They're not mentioned either. Now, okay, you don't want to mention because she was not actually involved in any investigation. She made that clear. It's like, you don't get the police commissioner going down to investigate a crime. They can't do it. They can go to visit the scene of the crime, and that's all they can do, but they can't investigate it. And that's what she was doing. She went along there to show the seriousness of the United Nations commitment to this issue. That's what she did. And the fact that her name doesn't get mentioned, nor does the team that went there 2 weeks before her, I'm getting ahead of myself again, but nothing to mention her. So yeah. Sorry.
All right, let's continue with Greg, folks. This is the next part of your thread, right? So there's also no usual reference to High Commissioner Secretary General Bachelet at the start of the report.
Yeah.
And these are the photos that you're showing. Tell us, what do you know about this, and why is this unusual?
Well, so if you look at the previous reports that were released by her office, one is the 2021 annual review in May 2022, and the other one is the Istanbul Protocol report released in June 2022. So this one is a Human Rights Council report. It also references the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. It doesn't say the office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. It says the actual High Commissioner of Human Rights. So then the next image is, if you go to
the next image.
Yeah, so this is the annual report of 2021. It was released in May 2022. And you can see, there's a forward by the High Commissioner with her signature. And then if you go to the next image, this is the Istanbul Protocol report released in June 2022. And again, there's a forward by the High Commissioner with her signature. So then if you go to this Xinjiang report, the next image, there is no forward by the High Commissioner. There is no signature by the High Commissioner. It doesn't even reference the High Commissioner. It references the office of the High Commissioner. So it's the office. And as we just talked about, the office was closed by the time this report was released. So I think it's very reasonable to assume that she did not want to be named in this report and did not want to be associated with this report.
Question to both of you. There is a lot of talk about China not wanting this report out, and these actions that we saw, the delay until the very last minute, kind of like go along this accusation that basically she was pandering to the Chinese government and accepting the request not to release, or to release as late as possible. How do we feel about that, Jerry?
I don't think that there's any doubt whatsoever that China didn't want this report released. They've actually written an annex to it, which basically says this is a political report, which does not it doesn't include any new evidence, new investigations. So yeah, the Chinese government didn't want it released. It was sent to the Chinese government for fact checking, as all international reports probably are from the United Nations. I can't say that for certain because I've never worked in their office, but it would make sense. And she did say that she'd sent it she'd sent her report to China for fact checking. Now, I don't know whether that's very important. What China does in terms of fact checking is just say, yeah, that was the city, that was the place, but they probably don't change the content of the report. So I'm not sure if 2 different reports went to the government in China for fact checking. I don't know the situation there. Of course, no one does except the people who received it and the people who sent it. But there's no doubt in my mind, China didn't try and delay this. They tried to stop this, quite rightly. This is a work of propaganda. It's a political undermining report that is basically reinforcing a narrative that has been investigated and hasn't been proven, but is now reinforced again. So there's no doubt in my mind. And it wasn't just China. I think 100 countries signed. 100 countries, that's more than half of the United Nations, which probably makes up 3/4 of their population as well. So a lot of people are against this report. It's not just this. We've only got the international community that actually supports the report. So yeah, China did try to stop this report going out, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. Did they try and delay it right to the last minute? I don't think there's any doubt that they didn't do that. They tried to stop it, full stop.
Great, folks. What's your thought on this? I mean, the Chinese government trying to stop the report and then it being released so late, probably after the term had ended.
I completely agree with Jerry there. And actually, if you go to the next tweet that I had, I show a analysis or a translation of the Chinese response. And the Chinese response was aimed at the office of the Human Rights Commissioner, not at the commissioner herself, Bachelet. So I think even from there, you can sort of infer that the Chinese do not believe it's from it's from Bachelet herself. It's from someone working behind the scenes. Actually, go back up. It's just before number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, there. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Chinese response did not mention Bachelet. So if she signed off on the report, I'm pretty sure they would say something about her, but they do not. So I think they are pretty clear that it's not her report.
What is very interesting to me is to see how this reply to the report that was written by the Chinese was way longer than the report itself. And what the Chinese did in that report was just address every single one of the questions that were raised in that report, which is, again, it was not a new report. There was nothing new. The only thing that was considered slightly new was the police files, the report by the BBC. And we all know all the issues that happened with that release, the server going down because they needed to fix some font issues and some pictures of people who were Han as opposed to weak. There were a lot of issues with that. Perhaps the biggest one, the fact that Adrian Zenz was given these files anonymously, right? Because it's AA. Always
and
anonymous.
He was the last editor of the Word files.
Exactly. And there was somebody from the Uyghur World Congress also doing some editing. So there were a lot of issues with this BBC police files report that didn't really add anything. I mean, you might want to add something, but when there's so many issues with this particular report, the BBC one, then it's really not adding anything. My point of view, my perspective is that Chinese read the report as it were an instance of them reviewing the report that was going to be released, and they felt like, look, number one, there's nothing new. Number two, all these things have been debunked. So all you're going to do releasing this report is add salt to a wound. There is no need to review this, to have it revived in the public sphere. So I feel that that's how they felt. This is dealt with, this is done, we don't need to go over this again. But again, here we are 10 days after the report and we're still talking about it. Why don't we move on to the next part of your tweet? Which one would you like to address, Greg Fox, next?
Well, just following on from what you say, so the next question was, so Bachelet's visit in May was not really referenced at all in the report. So it was mentioned one time that she was visiting in May, and then it was basically completely left out of the report. Her speech during the visit or at the end of her visit was not referenced, and no findings were referenced in the report. So it was almost like it was forgotten. But as you say, the Xinjiang police files, which were released at the same time as her visit to coincide and to distract from her visit, that was referenced multiple times. Even with all of the problems of those files, that was referenced multiple times. So is this really a genuine UN report when you don't even reference your own High Commissioner for Human Rights, but you reference some random reports from somewhere, from victims of communism?
Now we're going to talk about some of those things that are referenced in the report. So let's bring it back up. And okay, on the next one.
So yeah, if you could
there are
down,
multiple
that's the next
references to
one.
the Xinjiang police files, yes, which was released at the same time as the Bachelet's visit. let's take a look at some of these reports, right? Oh, this is too big. Okay.
So if you can go to the next next screenshot. The next screenshot. Yeah, this one. So I want to raise something in this one, which I can't, it's too complicated to go into on Twitter in the thread. So if you see here at the end, it says reportedly allows shoot to kill instructions in the case of escapes. So shooting, this is in relation to police manuals in those Xinjiang police files. So a few points, there's a lot of problems with this. Firstly, police manuals typically do not instruct policemen to shoot to kill, right? Jerry could correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
Because law enforcement is meant to arrest perpetrators alive so they can face justice. You know, the instruction could be lethal force may be used under these conditions, but I don't think you will ever instruct your police officers to shoot to kill specifically.
Correct.
So
I
think this is...
So I just interrupt you if you don't mind, Grey Fox. I was a trained police firearms carrier, firearms holder for a couple of years in the UK. And there are two things that the words that we don't use. One is shoot to kill and shoot to maim or shoot to wound. You shoot to stop. That's what it is. You aim at the largest part of the body. You don't aim for the legs. You don't aim for the arm. None of that. You simply, most police officers carrying handguns, and they're not very reliable in terms of their accuracy, particularly in the UK, where they have the snub-nosed police special, which is basically about the barrel's about this long, and you shoot to stop. That's the only thing you would do. The only Hollywood has shoot to kill, I think. Yeah. And of course, newspaper reporters use this and say, China is terrible. One other aspect that can add to this, the last time the Chinese police actually did shoot anyone was 2019. So it's not happening that often. That was a person driving a forklift truck into a bus stop full of people, and the police shot him dead. I think they shot him dead, and certainly they shot him. Yeah. So sorry, Grey Fox, carry on.
No problem. Yeah, that's very good input. Thanks for that. So I read the actual Chinese version of that manual. So they do actually use GB, which does mean shoot to kill, but I don't think that will ever appear in any formal Chinese documents, to be honest. But also, if you look at the order of the manual, this shoot to kill instruction comes after the police guards are instructed to call in the SWAT teams. And the SWAT teams would arrive within a few minutes, very quickly. So why would you tell these police guards to shoot to kill when you have SWAT teams with machine guns, fully armored, trained? They can do that. You should instruct them to shoot to kill. If you wanted to do that, you would instruct them, not the police guards who may not even be armed. Some police guards are not armed. So that's just, again, makes this very unbelievable. And then finally, if the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights really did believe this is a genuine document, right? They say that. They think it's a genuine document. If that was true, then isn't this a massive, massive red flag that you should investigate? Because police officers are being told to kill people with no protocols. You just, okay, you don't like these people, they're causing some trouble, you should shoot and kill them. Like, if I was the inspector, I would be going, okay, so how many people have you actually killed under this instruction? And can you please change it immediately, because this is a massive human rights issue. So in this particular report, and I'll be putting into the report, with massive headlines, and trying to do an investigation on that. But in this particular report, they just mentioned this shoot to kill order 2 times. One time in that screenshot, that footnote, as almost an afterthought. And then another time in another footnote that focuses on torture, also as a bit of an afterthought. So it's basically like they read this and they said, okay, that's interesting. Let's put it in there for maybe some headline purposes. But they didn't investigate it. They didn't care. They're basically not doing their job. So it's just quite extraordinary how they can include that in that report on human rights.
And not call for an immediate investigation on this shoot to kill measure. All right, let's move on to this one, because this one it really annoys me, because most of the media are using Adrian Zenz and his research and his studies to push for all this anti-Xinjiang measures around the world and attacking China on its counterterrorism efforts in Xinjiang. One of them was this particular problem here with reproductive rights of all women. Why don't you take us through this particular post, Gray Fox?
Sure. So this one is more about the contradiction in what they're saying. So previously, there have been concerns raised with the family planning laws of China and how it impacts women's reproductive rights, which, to be honest, I think is fair enough, right? The whole point of the law is to stop women from reproducing too many times. So, of course, there are concerns, and they're quite rightly so. But the concerns were for all women in China, right? The reproductive rights of all women in China. And we know that since the existence of these family planning laws in the 80s, the vast majority of applications have been on Han Chinese women, right? It's leniently applied or not applied at all on ethnic minorities. And now there's stricter enforcement in Xinjiang to bring it into line with the rest of the country. So how can this be used as an example of ethnic discrimination, which is what they're trying to say? The UN themselves have previously said this is an issue for all women in China. Now they're saying, okay, no, this is just an issue for ethnic minorities in China. No, it's not. It applies equally to everyone.
Mm-hmm. All right. Jerry, what's your take on this particular aspect? And then we go into the numbers, because the numbers, as you were talking, they're just ridiculous. And a lot of academicians have also talked about those numbers and how they discredit Adrian Zenz as a researcher. But Jerry, what's your take on this particular aspect of the...
Very similar. I'm living in Guangdong. I come from a family where my wife's family were punished for having an extra child. And we know that situation exists, and we know it was harsh. And we know that was an issue in relation to human rights against women. One of the things that didn't get a mention anywhere in this was that women's rights, gender rights, specifically gender rights, and also marginalized people, the LGBTI rights, have been legislated for inside of China. And that was mentioned by Michelle Bachelet. So in other words, what they're talking about here, as Gray Fox says, there are some concerns. There are concerns that the human rights abuses against women, forced sterilizations. My sister-in-law was threatened with one when she was going to have another baby, and it didn't happen. But this was as the policy was changing. So there is issues there. There's no question about it. But what actually has happened historically needs to be dealt with in a historical context, not going forward. This is not happening now. These restrictions have all been lifted. Now, people are saying, I mean, I've seen images of these people. They're in their 50s and they're saying, I was sterilized. Why would you be sterilized when you're in your 50s? That's one question I would ask. And no one ever cross-references or cross-examines these people. And secondly, if you've already got 5, 6, 7 children, did you ask to be sterilized? Did you want to be sterilized? What's the situation with these IUDs that are going in? So let's first of all treat it in its historical context. It was a problem. It's not such a big problem now. Let's treat the future, as Michelle Bachelet did say, gender and minorities and not minorities, marginalized people are being better treated in China as a result of new legislation. Where is that mentioned anywhere in the report? Michelle Bachelet did talk about it in her, not in her oral report, but in her press conference. And she praised China for it. So that's my comment on that. It's historical. It's not the future.
I wanted to comment also on the mistake that Adrian Zenz made, and if you guys can confirm the numbers, you probably remember them. If I'm not mistaken, he confused 80% by 8 per mil, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and that would have meant, yeah, Gray Fox, please elaborate.
Yeah, so I actually double-checked his calculations. So what he did was he took the insertions, he minused off the removals, he got a number, and then he added those numbers together and he divided one by the other to get 80% of net IUDs is in Xinjiang. But whereas the real number that he should really be using is 8.7% of the IUD insertions were in Xinjiang, and that would be a more reasonable number to use. And the reason why this 80% is unreasonable is because it's a bad number. It doesn't give you any information. When you read it, you think, oh, 80% out of 100. But actually, if you look at the mathematics of it, that 80% can be 80% out of 1,000,000%. It could be any number. So it really has no value at all. It just so happened to be 80% so that it sort of seemed like it's reasonable. But if you then redo the calculation again in the next few years, which I have done so he used 2018 figures, I looked for 2019 and 2020. The number that you get is minus 39% and minus 51%. With the same calculation. So what does that mean? Does that mean they're removing a lot of IUDs now and then they're just forcing you to have babies? It has no meaning.
Contradicts itself.
Yeah.
There's also a massive poverty alleviation program going on there. And we know, we know for a fact that people in poverty have more children. This goes back historically. My grandfather was one of 11, and I'm one of 5. So my kids, I've got 2 grandchildren. The generations are getting smaller all the time, and the world population is shrinking. This is an inevitability. Now, what would happen back in the day in Xinjiang? The women's rights were very much abused, because they were part of a minority group of people who have this male gender patriarchal society. And so the father would want to have several children. That was happening. Now they're going through a stage where there's no longer the poverty. There's very few people there's still a lot of poor people, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of poor people in Xinjiang, but there's not people living in abject poverty as used to and having more children because the wife didn't work. She worked on the family farm or whatever, and she just popped out children so that they had a future ahead of them. And as many children didn't die as possible. It's all different now. They're living in a modern society. They have options now they didn't have before. They have healthcare now that they didn't have before. And I wouldn't be surprised if we went and asked them, and I don't think anybody has, if we went and asked the people in Xinjiang, did you ask for this IUD? Yeah, of course I wanted it. I've already had 3 kids. I don't want any more. That's the way they'd be looking at it, in my opinion. Now, of course, that needs to be tested. You can't just say my opinion's right, but that does need to be tested. It's a fact where you have less poverty, you will always have less children. Historically, that's a proven fact, I'm sure. Okay.
And that is something that is taking place in Xinjiang. The poverty alleviation scheme is
amazing.
When
place.
you go there, you see, for example, pictures how certain touristy areas were in the past and how they are today. And because they are the way they are today, they bring in more tourists. That's what we saw in summer. In summer, there were millions of people going to Xinjiang, to the point that they were sending messages on social media like, "Don't come to Xinjiang. We're packed." So yeah, that's something that needs to be considered. When the living standard of people goes up, they tend to have fewer children. Let us move on then, Grey Fox, to the next topic, which is also very important because we are discussing your tweet, and we are entering this new space in the world where social media becomes a platform for people to make policies or make accusations and things like that. So on your fourth idea, you were talking about the footnotes in this report that actually includes tweets by Nathan Russo. Well, so can you take us through that one?
Sure. If you click on the picture, I can show you what I'm going to say. And it's actually much worse than just tweets. It's much, much worse. Okay, so once we get over the shock of a reference to Twitter itself, okay, so if you look at the reference, so the last little piece underlined there, so N Russo on Twitter, that's the reference, right? So there's no Twitter handle, there's no specific tweet. It just says N Russo on Twitter. So I think we all know who it's referring to, and we can find the right account, although I'm not sure which tweet they're talking about, but at least I can find the right person. But if you do not know who it was, and then you just try to find him on Twitter by, say, typing in n.rusa on the Twitter search function, who knows what results you're going to get and who you're going to click on, right? And so it could be a Nicholas Rusa, it could be a Nicole Rusa, it could be an n.rusa that I created in tomorrow, and it's just an account that I put random information on. And now you'll be an official UN referenced account because the UN does not reference a specific account. So that's very, very sloppy. And they don't, it's kind of mind blowing, really, that they can just say that in the report. And then once you get over that madness, right? Okay, so let's assume that we can find the right Nathan Russo account. We assume that Twitter is a legitimate evidentiary platform, which is debatable. Okay, so let's remember what his expertise is on Xinjiang. It's via satellite images. As far as we know, he hasn't ever visited Xinjiang.
He has not.
No. So both of you, Fernando and Jerry, you have lived in China for many years. You've physically been to Xinjiang. You've filmed in Xinjiang. You talk to people in Xinjiang. You can probably go and visit a local Xinjiang restaurant today and then ask them about their hometowns. So you have a lot more credible information about Xinjiang than Nathan does. So why are your tweets not referenced in the UN report? Why is his reference?
Good question.
But you're not referenced.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, and then furthermore, even more than that, there are actually people from Xinjiang, Uyghurs and non-Uyghurs, on Twitter who are sharing their stories about their hometowns, who are sharing their opinions. So why are they not referenced in the UN report? And then,
as opposed to what happens to Nathan Russo, who gets promoted by different entities around the world via Twitter. Well, we just saw that this morning, or it was yesterday, a Twitter account from a girl who used to share her farming life in Xinjiang. I don't know if it was her own, but just promoting products of Xinjiang, like honeydew melons, and look at these grapes, and look at suspended. For what reason? For what reason would that account? Because I tell you, the only thing that account did was share things that were related to farming in Xinjiang. Suspended. Jerry, what's your take on Nathan Russo?
I used to think Nathan Russo was a smart young man who was misled, and I've had conversations with him, private conversations through DMs and through emails. He and I have exchanged several emails. He's now an extremely rude individual. He doesn't like me at all because I keep questioning and correcting him. I'm not going to dispute that there are prisons, and some of those prisons have been expanded inside of Xinjiang. The Xinjiang region had a huge terrorist issue. Yes, there are prisons. Yes, there are vocational voluntary training education centers, which everybody else calls VTECs. They use the C as camp. And this is all because of rhetoric. The word camp is a lot different to the word training center, training camp. Let's see how that reacts in people's brains. Nathan Russo has identified 680, I think, sites, or 380 sites. And a lady called Alison Killing has taken his report, written an article about it, and won a Pulitzer Prize. I was actually tapped on the shoulder the other day in a private party I was at just the other day by an American friend of mine. And he said, "Hey, Jerry, I've just got to tell you this. You're on the wrong side of history." I said, what are you talking about? He said, "All this stuff you say about Xinjiang, you're wrong. You're gonna fall over. You got to pull back on it." And I said, "Why do you say that?" I'm not saying his name. Why do you say that name? And he said, "You realize that this has won a Pulitzer Prize. It must have some legs." I said, "Are you fucking kidding me? It's won a Pulitzer Prize because this is what they want it to be." Now, I don't know I know for a fact Nathan Russo has never been to China. I know that for a fact because he's told me. He's afraid he can't come to China now. He'll never come. Adrian Zenz has been to China, but only for a 10-day tour more than 20 years ago. Now, these people have never been here, and they're writing about these sites that they can see. This is the most important factor. I have around the corner from me a primary school, and that primary school has a huge tall fence and a gatehouse on the front. The gatehouse is permanently locked. The kids go in through a scanner. They have a card that allows them in. This keeps them safe. No child in a school in China has been killed by a crazy nutcase in many, many years. It did happen. We know about the knife attacks. Yes, it did happen. What did China do? It actually acted to make schools safe. And they are safe. Those kids, the moment they walk through that door, are as safe as they are going to be for the rest of their lives. That's what this has done. It doesn't lock people in. It keeps bad people out. And that's what Nathan Russo has no idea about. Alison Killings, who is some kind of architectural prison expert, and so was I. I designed prisons. I've designed access control, closed circuit television, and I've designed both the physical and the electronic security for prisons in Australia. Now, I do know what a prison looks like. These are not prisons. I also know what a factory looks like, what a school looks like inside of China. And that's what they're looking at. Schools, colleges, factories, and saying, there's a detention camp because it's got a gatehouse, it's got big fences, it's got a dormitory, it's got a cafeteria or a canteen, and it's got people wearing uniforms. Wow. That's China. That's what they do.
One of the things that impresses me the most about their ignorance of China is when they show these pictures of blue roofs. If you've been to China for 5 minutes, you know that blue roofs are just aluminum, tin. That doesn't provide any security at all if you were to build a prison with that kind of roof. But they don't know it.
Part of my house is a blue roof.
Chicken farms and all. That's what they use in China for just roofing solutions, but they're cheap. They're not the strongest.
On the windows.
Exactly. So I want to reference somebody because Nathan Russo comes with a name attached to him, which is ASPI. But there are other people out there that are doing something similar. If you remember Nathan Russo, he was arguing that a WeChat pay code was a way for the government to get information about people in Xinjiang. Just the stupidest thing ever. But we're seeing on Twitter, and I am daily contesting this individual. This has nothing to do with report, so it's going to be a short minute. Abdueli, this language expert or language teacher that is in exile, and he keeps posting images of just nothing on Twitter, saying the most horrible stories without zero evidence. And Twitter security, which is hired ASPI as the security advisor, cybersecurity advisor, does nothing. This is a person posting information that has zero evidence and zero proof, but people digest this information and get their ideas from somebody like this Abdueli person. So if I were to take a picture of somebody and come up with a very crazy story about, I don't know, Joe Biden accosts this person or attack, I would probably be in Twitter prison. But this person gets to do this without consequence because it's along the lines of what they want to say, and because, well, ASPI is the one providing cybersecurity to Twitter these days. Gentlemen, let's move on with Gray Fox's tweets, right? Your thread.
Yep.
The next point was it?
This is the Xinjiang victims database. Again, a lot of problems being pointed out about that database on Twitter and other platforms. I think this one is particularly funny because this victim, in quotation marks, is referred to a VETC by her mother. So if I was the UN, shouldn't I just go and ask the mother, why did you do that? The mother obviously thought it was beneficial for her daughter. So, if you were going to do due diligence on these kind of databases and the quality of your evidence, then you really should go and check out why that happened and get the full story. But that's not what the UN did.
A lot of people, when I talk about the situation in Xinjiang, is I also say, well, look, there was a terrorist situation, and terrorists don't work in isolation. They have aiders and abettors. So people who don't necessarily are performing the acts or coordinating everything, but they promote or they try to enroll new people. So they have a function with this within these organizations. They don't have to be the most terrible people, but they are fundamentally and ideologically aligned with what these terrorists and separatists want to do. So those people haven't committed heinous crimes, but when they're caught and when they look at their phone and say, oh, so this is the kind of communication that you're having with all these people. Okay, so we want to help you. We want to help you to become a better person for society. So that's what these training centers were for. Now, let's talk a little bit about other victims. What other victims have you heard of? Again, I refer this Abduli, who says that he was sent to prison for teaching Uyghur language when you can go to Xinjiang and listen to Uyghur radio and watch Uyghur TV and listen to people talking Uyghur language every single place, let alone the fact that there's Uyghur in the Chinese banknotes, etc., etc., etc. So there are people out there lying about their experience and what happened to them. Jerry, do you recall any others that have weird stories about?
Yeah, there's a few weird stories. There's that lady who said, first of all, claimed she was a teacher in a detention center, and then claimed she was the same lady. A different interview claimed that she was a prisoner in one. She also, in another interview, claimed that she was never abused, and then another interview claimed she was starved, and then in another interview claimed she was forced to eat pork. I don't know how long she was in, whether she was starved for a couple of days and then forced to eat pork. I don't know the story there, but it was, none of these things actually show any degree of continuity. It's like they haven't quite got their continuity editing right. We've got these people who say one thing and then a month or a year later say another thing. We had that long debate about the police officer who was there as well. And I very much to this day, I doubt that guy was a police officer. I don't know. He's just disappeared into the ether. There's a lot of different things like this the guy that you're talking about who claims to have been arrested and then convicted and sent to prison for teaching Uyghur language is now living, I think, in Virginia, United States. I'm not 100% certain. He might be in another country, but he's not in China anymore. How the hell did he get out of China? The borders are closed. You need a passport. You need a visa to go somewhere. Xinjiang doesn't have any embassies or consulates, so he's had to travel across China, go and lodge an application for a visa. If he's in America or Europe, you can't just do this online. You have to go and pick it up. You've got to go and get your own passport as well. You have to apply for a passport. These things just don't add up. They really don't add up. No one's ever cross-examined this guy. They just take him at his, no, they don't take him at his word. They use his word. I'm not sure if the people who report him believe him or just want his story because it's a good story that fits. And then they're probably, as they're interviewing, say, can you tell us any more? Can you tell us any more? And he's thinking, now, what do they want to hear? Oh, I'll tell them this. And so it goes. But I mean, the guy, if he went to prison...
for teaching Uyghur language.
China, for teaching the language, but China's supposedly an authoritarian, totalitarian state. If they sent him to prison for something that is a very, not even a minor offense, not even an offense, it's a human rights abuse if they send him to prison for that. So if they send him to prison for a human rights abuse, why would they then give him a passport to go and tell the world about it? That's a good question, I think.
Yep. All right, let us address now this next person, which actually it's crazy that they're still citing this person, Adrian Zenz. So, Grey Fox, this next part of your tweet addresses him.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, his background, I think we pretty much know his background. He's a Christian fundamentalist. He thinks he's been put on the planet to destroy communist China. So I don't know if you want to be referring to someone like that. His research methodologies are faulty. His results are illogical, basically. He doesn't know how to translate Chinese properly. There's really nothing about him that is reliable in terms of information on China, to be honest. So it's very suspicious that he's relied on in a UN report like this. And similarly, like, for example, this victims of communism referral, like the name suggests a very heavy ideological bias already. So why is a United Nations report relying on information from such an organization? It's surely biased. It's just unimaginable that a UN report can rely on such faulty sources.
And one thing that we were talking about, or that people in certain circles here in China are talking about, is not just what you say, but what you don't say, right? So it's very easy to create a lie by not saying things that are true. And this visit, this next part of your tweet, is something that Jerry also talked about in his video, who's, I don't know, 50,000 views already. Congratulations on that one, Jerry.
I don't think it's that many, but thank you. I think it's my biggest yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still a new guy on YouTube.
So go subscribe to his channel if you're watching on my channel, and follow Grey Fox on Twitter. Basically, so many Muslim leaders have visited Xinjiang, have supported the efforts that the government has made in the region, but this is not given as much of a voice out there in the media, or out there with government, or even in the report. So, Grey Fox, what do you comment on this one?
And I think this might be one of the worst cases of bias in the evidence that they use. Diplomats from Muslim-majority countries are not mentioned at all. I didn't mention this in the tweet, but Voronkov, the UN anti-terrorism expert, he is not mentioned in the report. In a UN report, they don't mention their own anti-terrorism experts' assessment. They don't mention the assessments of diplomats from the member countries. They mention evidence from victims of communism, but not those other organizations. So it's really bad how biased the evidence can be. I would say you should never ever mention any evidence on victims of communism, because it's just way too ideologically biased. But if you're going to mention them, surely you should mention the diplomats, your own assessments, your own terrorism expert, any other credible organizations, right? So anyway, it's just very frustrating.
Okay.
Jerry, can I add a little bit more? Can I add a little more to that as well?
That's why I invited you for.
Thank you. I did a little more research into that, and I knew about the Vladimir Voronkov visit. He's the United Nations head of counterterrorism. He came across, he looked at the VTECs, and he said, this is a very good idea, blah, 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 blah. Now, his report has never been released. There's no report written by him that I can find anyway. So maybe if someone has access to that, I'd love to see it. But let's go a little further than that. There is a report written by United Nations Human Rights Special Rapporteur and a United Nations human rights independent expert on two different things. Human rights experts have visited China, not Xinjiang, China, 2 times in the last 3 years. China is not hiding at all from the Human Rights Commission or the Human Rights Council. China is opening its doors to them. It invited them in 2018. And the reason it was a late invite is because America kept stopping it. In 2018, Nikki Haley removed America from the United Nations Human Rights Council. The moment America were removed, China got in there with an invitation which would have been blocked and said, come and visit. It took this time to get that visit happening. So China's not hiding from. America are trying to stop it from happening. Now, having said that, I'll go one step further and say, why do you think that when a human rights team visited the United States, they were arbitrarily detained and then kicked out of the country without entering properly? The United States stopped a UN human rights team from entering its country at the same time as China is allowing the UN human rights teams to enter the country. In China, in fairness, this is not about Xinjiang. Those 2 visits one were about aged concerns, human rights for old people, and one was human rights for poverty, abject poverty. So China is not saying to the UN Human Rights Council, you can't come. It's saying, please come and have a look. And America, on the other hand, and you can go onto the UN Human Rights Council's webpage, and find reference to this. There is a report that the United States arbitrarily detained a UN human rights team when they tried to enter America to do an investigation. Wow. If America are doing that and China are doing this, what does that tell you about things in the world? It tells me that what I'm listening to, and I'm not trying to be whataboutism here, but what I'm listening to in the rest of the world doesn't add up to the reality of what's happening in China because of that.
All right. Let's move on to the next part, and this is extremely, extremely upsetting in terms of professionalism. A report from the United Nations. Great folks, you talked about the unofficial translations.
Yeah.
Who has heard of that in the United Nations report?
Making it worse, Chinese is an official language of the United Nations. English is an official language of the United Nations. There will be no shortage of translators to translate from English to Chinese or Chinese to English. And yet, the UN report relies on unofficial translations, probably done by people like Zenz and ASPI and their friends. And we know they can't translate Chinese. So how can this? So this is basically bordering on negligence by the UN to use these translations. Because if you really think they're authentic documents from the government that they're trying to hide, should you not translate it properly and make sure that the meaning is clear, rather than just rely on some unofficial translation and the meaning could be obscure? It's unbelievable for the UN to do this.
No, and they have taken enough time to do this report, right? They went until the very last minute to publish it, so they could have hired somebody to do an official translation and spend their time making sure that all the meanings are correct. Jerry, what's your take on the translation, mistranslations? What examples do you have of things that have been
they were probably pushed. They were probably pushed for time because that was released in 2016 and they've only had 6 years to get it right. I don't know. Honestly, the sarcasm coming out there. They've had plenty of time. All of these documents have been available. The article, the report, probably, I'm thinking it's more like an article than a report. The United Nations report is... It's supposed to be an official UN report, and I couldn't agree more with Grey Fox here. Why rely on an unofficial translation when you have literally got an office full of Chinese translators in your building or in your company, corporation, which the United Nations is? You say there's no reason for, there's no excuse for it. It's a preference to use something which is not as reliable as your own sources. Why?
I find something very interesting when not talking about the United Nations Human Rights Report, but talking about the Uyghur Tribunal in England just last year. I remember one of the experts that have prepared a document for talking about the IUD insertions and all these things. And one of the judges of this tribunal, which had no legal basis, important to mention, this was just an LLC that was called a tribunal. But one of these experts said, like, okay, but your report says something on page 44 and it contradicts itself in page 46. Why is that? And this poor young lady trying to explain herself as and then QC Nice, the head of this tribunal, when I'm like, don't worry, you can fix this before September when we have the second round of this tribunal. I just want to mention how incredible it is that organizations that are in charge of such important matters are so sloppy in their work. It just makes you wonder, are they just pulling things out of where? Because how could it be that they are in a tribunal and they are pointed out contradictions that they have written themselves? Again, let's move on to the next Grey Fox point, which was about choosing the BBC report over the CCTV report.
It's the same theme basically. So BBC did this report on CCTV report on labor transfer programs. And they basically cut the report up to sound very sinister and very coercive from the government. But if you watch the CCTV report, I think there were multiple parts. They actually show the multiple times the cadres tried to convince the young lady in the report to join the labor transfer programs. They went back multiple times. So if it was forced, then there would be no need to go back multiple times. You just go and say, yeah, you're joining. Yeah, go. And then the CCTV also did a follow-up. So so she went, they did a follow-up. Okay, how was your experience? Are you happy? Blah, blah, blah. And she was happy with the results. So if you were fair, then you should just refer to the CCTV report. You say, okay, we have some concerns, but this is the full report. Rather than refer to the BBC report of the CCTV report, which just cut up and just shortened the whole process and focused on some areas they wanted to highlight rather than the entire story. So I think it's very biased for them to do that.
All right. This part is so infuriating, right? Paragraph 42, where they talk about not a single interviewee said that they were able to exit the facility or go home for a visit. And the BBC report itself, the BBC video show that they had, the program, shows people going home for the weekend.
Yes, exactly. So if you like the BBC, then trust the BBC, right? They show you they went home for the weekend. So the UN only interviewed 40 people, 23 of them were Uyghurs. It's a very small sample already. And since they said, okay, no one was able to exit the facility, well, we showed you a BBC report where people were exited the facility. So that indicates that your sample is way too biased, way too small, and you should get more samples. That's basically what it indicates. But they didn't do that. So again, it's just poor report writing, poor investigation.
It's just weird to me that even the people who are attacking China, attacking Xinjiang, they can't get their thoughts together. You have this guy, CJ Wirleman, I think is his name.
Yeah, Wirleman. Yeah.
Through the years, he's gone from 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 6 million. I think the last time he was at 9 million. Don't quote me on that, but it's ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense. So if you were to take his 6 million people incarcerated, and then you take a sample of 42, 40, whatever, what percentage is that? What kind of sample is that when you're talking about 6 million people?
But 6 million people, you're also talking about 25% of the population of the region. That's a lot of people.
12 million total.
It's more than 50% of the population of Uyghurs, but it's 25% of the population of the entire region. So it shouldn't be too hard to get a sample. I have another example I'd like to just throw in here. It's completely unrelated to this, but 2 years ago, I had an online dispute with a guy called Olsi Jazeski. He is an Albanian Muslim, and he went on a visit. He's very anti-America. So the Chinese, when he applied to the Chinese government to go on a visit to Xinjiang, they let him go. And what they didn't realize was that he's not anti-America. He's anti-everything except fundamental Islam. And he went and he was quite argumentative on his entire trip, and he posted video images quite often from inside of what he called the camps, but were obviously training schools. And there's a great video that he himself posted where he said to the teacher, "Are they allowed to practice religion?" The teacher said, "Not in school, but of course at home they have freedom of religion." He said, "Well, are they allowed to go home?" "Yes, they go home every weekend and come back on Sunday evenings." Okay, now fast forward, this same man has posted a video where he gives evidence to the European Parliament. And he said, "They told me they're not allowed to practice religion. The teacher told me that." That's a straight out lie from his own evidence. He said, "I asked if they're allowed to go home, and the teacher said, no, they're not." Another straight out lie from his own evidence. When I challenged him on this, and I challenged, it's online, you can see this interview if you look hard enough. I challenged him on this, and he was shouting down at me, shouting. I could hardly get a word in edgeways. And I said to him finally, "Why did you say they're not allowed to go home when the teacher on your video clearly said they are allowed to go home?" His answer, he was lying.
The
The
teacher was
teacher
lying.
was lying. They're not allowed to go home. I said, how do you know that? The teacher told you they were. What did you do to prove that they weren't? You just took an assumption that that teacher was telling you a lie, and you told the European Parliament. That's
That you
a
knew.
lie. Yeah. There you go.
Oh
That's
my.
how it gets out. That's the European Parliament have now passed a motion saying that there is human rights abuses, international human crimes against humanity, that kind of thing. They've passed a motion on this, and it's based on information like that. They're getting information from people who confirm on their own website that they're lying.
All right, gentlemen, let's move on a little bit faster on this one. We were talking about paragraph 135. An individual lost contact with more than 30 relatives. You listed a lot of Gray Fox. You listed a lot of cases that were page by page. I want to ask you a question before we move on. Why are you doing this, Gray Fox? What is your motivation? The same for Jerry.
So my motivation, I guess, this is going to be maybe a bit of a long story. So I didn't really start actively looking at political stuff until the Hong Kong riots in 2019. And so, just one thing after another, once there's the lockdowns, I had a bit more time to look at YouTube videos and do some more online research. And I got interested in this Xinjiang genocide claim because I've been to Xinjiang before. It's completely contradictory to what I know about Xinjiang and also what I know about how Chinese treat their ethnic minorities. So I just wanted to have a look at the evidence that they present, the arguments that they have, and I find that they're very unconvincing. They're very faulty, and it's pretty much a media narrative. There's no actual evidence. So that's why I'm trying to push back against the narratives. And even now, the UN has a report which is just full of these narratives. So I think it's important to point that out and to make people aware that they're not really relying on accurate information, reliable information. This is pretty much just people saying stuff. Sure, you can say stuff, but you need to have evidence to back that up if you want to make any proper decisions.
Jerry?
Similar thing. I don't think anyone comes into this with a view to saying, I want to be political about this. I never did. I came onto Twitter purely to show my bike riding across China, show how China is a lovely place. I had not a political bone in my body at the time. And you and I have spoken about the bike rides, but what that led to, because I cycled into and right the way across Xinjiang, straight across the middle of Xinjiang, effectively, from the border of Xinjiang to the border of Kazakhstan. And that's 1,800 kilometers or something like that. It's quite a long way once you enter the border of Xinjiang. And what I saw there is completely contradictory to the mainstream media. But I wasn't taking pictures at the time of those kinds of things. I wasn't really that concerned about it. But when I started posting photographs, I got people coming back to me and saying, you can't do that. You're not allowed to go to Xinjiang. Xinjiang, what about all the concentration camps? And, I know, hang on a second, I didn't see anything like that. And I started to just say that, that's actually not true, that doesn't happen. Yeah, there's high security there, but that's all. I didn't see any camps. What are you talking about, camps? I mean, I knew that there's stories about these camps, but I never thought that I would physically be involved in refuting them or actively involved in refuting them. Not at that time. Had I realized, if I go to Xinjiang now, I'll be going with a very different mentality and different cameras. I would be there taking videos, taking interviews, talking to people in the street, talking to people in restaurants, and actually getting the real story. The real story as I know it. And I was asked in one media interview very, very early on in the piece, why do you stand up for China? And I said, I don't. And I really didn't at that time. It's a strange question. I just wanted to correct the truth, correct the mistruths. And that's all I was doing. Suddenly I'm standing up for China. Now that I think about it, what I do is I stand up for China. And I do very much so. I agree with that now. I didn't agree with it at the time. But the reason I stand up for China is because for the most part, they're getting things right. They're doing things right. Every single measurement metric in lifestyle, in economy, in finance, in education, in health. It's all getting better. Yes, it started from a poor position 40 years ago, but it's all getting better. Every metric you can measure, the way of life in China is better than it used to be. So yeah, now I do stand up for China, because I've just put out an article which shows the rot in American society. And the article, I've never been to America, and people say you shouldn't comment on it if you haven't been there. Well, then stop telling me I'm wrong when you haven't been to China, if that's your view. So that's how I feel about that. It's a bit of a finger in your eye to American people who tell me that I'm wrong without ever having left Wisconsin or wherever they live. So yeah, the American system is rotten to the core. The Chinese system has been through some periods of rottenness, no doubt about it. But right now, it's probably the best working system in the world for 1.4 billion people. And yes, I do stand up for China. So that's my reasoning behind it.
Before we go to the next point, which is probably the most important point, the absence of the word genocide or the use of the word may constitute crimes against humanity. Before we go there, I want to ask both of you, where do we go from here? Let me explain what I'm trying to say. When the United Nations commits this full-on mistakes, produces this report that is clearly biased, influenced by political forces at the United Nations, at this level, when we see that this is a tainted report, where do we go from here? How do we move forward, and who do we go to? Grey Fox, what's your thought?
Well, I think we do what the United States does, to just basically ignore things like this. So, except their reports are actually real. But I think the United Nations is a political entity in the end. So there will be various vested interests trying to fight against each other in the United Nations. And this is a report of, clear bias. So China put out their refutations. And I would say, at least there's a voting system, right? So if anyone wants to do anything in the United Nations, they have to go to a vote. And I'm pretty sure China will win handily in those kind of situations. So the media will make a big deal about it. Some governments may make a big deal about it. But I think in the end, you pretty much just let it be. It's on the record now, and move on and just continue to achieve the results that China are achieving, and grow your own country. And then eventually it won't matter. This won't matter. The time will tell. The Uyghur population will continue to grow, and China will continue to get more prosperous. So that will be undeniable. So pretty much just ignore it. It's just noise. And this report doesn't even give the countries what they're looking for, because some countries have declared this a formal genocide. The Uyghur Tribunal, the clown show there, they've announced that it's a genocide. This is not what the report says. This report is actually much below genocide. It doesn't even mention genocide at all. So I don't think they can go very far with this.
Jerry, where do we go from now?
I'm inclined to agree with part and disagree with part. I think China needs to get a little more offensive here. I have some ideas. I don't, unfortunately, give advice to the Chinese government. I wish I did, because if they listened, they might learn something from what I would suggest. The Chinese government has been extremely patient. It is doing exactly what Grey Fox suggests that they do. It is being reticent in pushing out any form of anti-rhetoric. I wrote an article about this, and I asked Global Times if they were interested, and they said, no, we're not touching this. So Global Times, the most vocal of all the Chinese media, I think, in terms of its propaganda, are not getting into this discussion. They're leaving it for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to refute. And that's fair enough. So I just put my article into a video form and put it out on YouTube. And that's the one that we're talking about. In fact, there's been two of them, two videos that I've done, and they've both been very good. Combined, I think they're close to 50,000 views, which for a guy with only 3,000 followers, subscribers, is pretty darn good, I think. I have a couple of ideas and suggestions, and I think they should fill up a ship with containers full of everything that the United States needs, and then stop in Cuba and drop off a couple of containers. the American government have a law that says any ship that stops in Cuba cannot stop in America for the next 6 months. They should then say, well, we've got all this medicine for you that you're going to need. Do you want it or not want it? Because we'll take it back to China. That's what I think should happen. The American government will have to capitulate on this and say, we need that medicine. We've got to deliver it. Well, it's coming on the ship that's been in Cuba. And I think Cuba will, that's what they need to do. They need to stop off in Cuba every time they're delivering a major, something really important into America. This is not sanctioning them. This is just saying, well, we're going to deal with Cuba, which they do. There's a Cuban embassy in China. They do deal with Cuba. So why not send a ship there and say to America, you can have this medicine, but you have to forego your own sanction on this. Stuff like that.
Or
what needs
something as simple as forcing every single product that is shipped out of China into the United States to have some kind of label or sticker or something made in Xinjiang, because now, according to the Forced Worker Labor Act of June,
partially made in Xinjiang or packaged in Xinjiang,
exactly. So
whatever
now you can't get it.
Yeah.
All those things that you really desperately need, you can't get it because it has a sticker made in Xinjiang, probably, and very likely.
87% of all Americans' medicine comes from here, from China. So that means that one container full of medicines going into America is vitally important. A ship full of PPE, medicines, therapeutics can't get into America. That's what I think they should do. Can't go into America until America says, oh, we're sorry. Maybe that's the way to do it.
All right, so let's finish up today's video with the last point on Grey Fox, the point about genocide. Basically, it doesn't say anything. The word genocide is not mentioned. And the worst part is that the allegations that lead to human rights violations, most of them are deemed as not credible, as you pointed out in your tweet. So what are we looking at here, Grey Fox?
Yeah, so as you say, the evidence is faulty. The conclusion is serious human rights violations in the context of government's application of counterterrorism. So that's actually important, because if you read newspaper articles, they just say, oh, China has committed serious human rights violations. They do not say in the context of government's application of counterterrorism. So that's very sneaky of them as well. So again, okay, now we're moving from genocide to human rights violations, but in the context of counterterrorism. So what does that mean? I think it means that we should actually study how to do counterterrorism, because there's no agreed method of doing counterterrorism. Each country is just basically doing their own thing. So if we are students of science, then what we really should be saying is, okay, I'm going to look at these on their merits and free from any preconceived ideological biases. All right, so that's what we really should be doing. So then we should, sorry, apologies. Yeah, so then if we look at the different methods, in America, their counterterrorism method, the war on terror, has been very ineffective. It has created more terrorists. It has violated every human rights in the book. So we should just leave that and not ever do that and mention that again. We should encourage America to stop it. And then if we look at the Chinese method, okay, I think we can all say that it's been very effective because there has been no terrorism for a number of years now. I think we can also agree that there's potentially problems with the implementation on individual bases, because there could be cases where people are unfairly put into training centers or suspected of being terrorists. I think it's fair to say that. However, we should be looking at ways to improve it rather than demonize it, right? Because if we demonize it, now there's no way to actually discuss this rationally without it being taboo and being called genocide deniers, for example. And the world will never move forward with a more effective counterterrorism method, and it's worse. The world is worse off. All of us are worse off. So really, I think it's a very big shame on these countries and the media or these NGOs who have labeled this a genocide, even though they know full well, and it's shown in this report, even in this report, it's proven that it's for the purpose of counterterrorism. So you really should be approaching it from a more open mind and using scientific ideals to judge it on its merits. And it's unfortunately the very same countries that established the scientific methodologies that we use today that are betraying those methodologies when it comes to this particular issue.
All right, Jerry, what's your take?
Very similar. I agree 100% that there are probably individual abuses in this system. You put people into prisons and you put people into uniforms guarding those prisons, you're going to get abuses. And that's a fact. What really disappoints me about this is that the United Nations have got all anonymous reports about this. Now, that anonymity creates a huge problem for China, because I would suggest, knowing what I know of the Chinese government, there are no systemic human rights abuses there. Now, were there at the very beginning? Possibly. Did the military or the police go into those areas, clamp down, and then slowly ease off? And I think that's probably how it happened. They clamped down really hard and then slowly eased back, and they let people out of the system. That's possibly what this all relates to right at the very beginning. A very, very strict clampdown and a very quick easing off the accelerator and letting the gas go so that people can be resumed into their normal life. You've got to stop this in its tracks, and China may have done this very aggressively, assertively, however way you want to put it. So I'm not suggesting that there hasn't historically been some form of abuses, but whether those abuses are systemic. I know for a fact, I was a police officer 10 years. I know police officers in uniform who are aggressive, violent, overbearing, and would quite happily torture someone because they feel that that's a good thing. And it's those very, very few, tiny, tiny minority. I mean, I was a police officer for 10 years, and I know two that I could say, in fact, both of them were out of the police force while I was in it. Those two got us a bad reputation. There were 26,000 police officers in my police service, in the Metropolitan Police, 26,000, and I personally knew of two who were bad guys, and neither of them lasted longer than me. I resigned after 10 years to go and live in Australia. So that's my reason for leaving. Their reason for leaving was very different. They were kicked out. One of them even went to prison. That happens. If the United Nations has evidence of individual abuses inside of those camps, as they call them, centers, as I prefer to call them, if they have individual cases, bring those cases forward to the Chinese government and have them dealt with on an individual basis. So if there is a bad apple inside their military, inside their police service, China wants them out. Nobody wants to work. No police officer wants to work with an a-hole. I can assure you of that, unless they are like that. And I believe, I don't know about Chinese police in Xinjiang, but Chinese police in Zhongshan, here where I live, very friendly, happy people. So I don't think that this is an evidence. This is not evidence of systemic abuse within a system. This is maybe evidence. It's just maybe stories of people who are saying, I did get raped because I need a visa to stay in America. Or it could be, as we know, one person did. She started off with a story that she worked in this camp and ended up with a story of she was tortured in this camp. These are two different stories from the same person. And it morphed through a totally different versions of her story over a period of years. Now, those people have a reason for doing it. Let's bring all the evidence to the Chinese government and have the Chinese government look into it, because I'm certain the Chinese government do not want people in their uniforms who are abusive. That's the way I would say it. But at the moment, the anonymity is killing any chance of doing that.
Well, I want to kind of put my last thought out and
Right.
look at Greg Fox's tweet right here, where he says that based on current available information, it is not possible to draw a wider conclusion as to the extent to which there may have been broader patterns of SGBV and BETC. I mean, the language that is in this report, the language that is through every single report that we've come across and that we have examined individually or as a group, me and Jerry, or on Twitter, it's always language of uncertainty. is always language that leads you to, we don't know. We don't know. But let's conclude in a way that is going to be unfair to China. Let's conclude in a way that is going to allow us to destabilize this country that we see as our main opponent. So I really want to draw people's attention. And I think that it was funny on Twitter because a lot of people corrected themselves very quickly. The moment this UN report went out, most anti-China people were creating posts that said, like, it is clear the UN says that what measures the the Chinese government has implemented may constitute crimes against humanity, and everybody went with that wording, which is a wording from the report. And I said, like, hold on one second, do you guys understand the meaning of the word may? It basically means you don't know. And I made a short video about the water challenge, where I said to people, like, okay, if I had poison in this glass of water, it may or may not have poison. Would you drink from it?
You didn't say poison.
Well, yeah. I made 2 videos. And then people say, and then of course you wouldn't, because you don't know, you have no idea. And that's the point. When you have something worded like this, it leads you to the inability to take action because you do not know. And that's the sad thing. That's basically where we are. We are in a situation where conclusions and actions and countermeasures are being taken around the world against China based on documents like this, worded this way. We've talked about the Adrian Zenz report on labor. His conclusion is it is impossible to know where does forced labor or coerced labor starts or doesn't. So any single report that you see, either from mainstream media, from researchers, or from ASPI, they all talk about things that could be, might be, are likely, possibly, but there is zero certainty. There's not a single thing that can be ascertained as we know this to be true. All right, gentlemen, we said we wanted to do a short one. Look, Gray Fox and Jerry, I want to thank you very much. You make me wiser every time that I read your tweets and every time that I see your videos and I talk to you guys. So thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and the work that you do in trying to educate us and let people know the truth behind these reports. So Great Folks, once again, thank you very much. Any last words?
No, just everybody should keep an open mind and look at the reports, not just the headlines.
Great. And Jerry?
I did see one headline that says Human Rights Report confirms, and there is one sentence in the Human Rights Report that actually says China has. There is one sentence. But then if you read carefully down there, you'll see that it's very, very interestingly worded. It shows that there are people who may have misinterpreted or overinterpreted their instructions. So those people have. That's what it was, and it wasn't. There's no evidence whatsoever. I agree with Gray Fox. Keep an open mind. Read the report. Read the other report, the 121-page report, which I'll be honest, I haven't seen yet. I keep hearing about this 121-page report that is attached to the report, but I haven't seen it yet. And
I have it. I'll send it to you.
Thank you. But I'm not going to read it because, as you know, we're going to be busy over the next couple of days.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're both traveling to Beijing, right?
Yes, sir.
I'll see you there. But,
all right, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. Good. No, thank you everybody for watching this video.
Great to meet you. Thank you.
Likewise, Derek.
That's it. Until we see you again, take it easy and bye for now.
Bye.